Merry readers, come cozy in. Let the story time begin with Robin and the Marys.
Hi Merry Readers, today is September 24th and that means it is time for chapter 7 of A Discovery of Witches. So in this chapter we start with Diana waking up from a nightmare, and she describes that in her nightmare she felt like she was drowning and something was pulling her down, and when she wakes up she is scared again because she sees her own reflection in the window and she thinks that it's someone staring in at her. So right away she was so terrified that she actually gets sick, so she goes to the bathroom, and after that she starts blaming all of the creatures like Matthew and the other demons and witches that have been following her, and thinks that she's feeling so terrified because of being followed. So as the morning goes on, she decides to get dressed even though it's really early and quite foggy outside and go for a row. So she goes out, she runs through the streets all the way to the river. She has to scale and hop a fence to get into the river because it's not actually open yet, and she takes out a boat and goes out on the river to row. And she talks about how on the river it is so foggy that she can hardly see anything around her, so she decides to play a game that she likes to do of relying on her senses to tell her, just by listening to the oars when she's getting closer to the wall, feeling the shadows of the bridges as they pass above her. And so she does this for a while until she comes across two other rowers, and as they pass she realizes that she's gone far enough and she turns around and she goes back to the row house to put away her boat. And she decides that since it's such a nice foggy morning, she would take a stroll back into town instead of running. And so she's walking back into town. She notices how cold it is because it is a foggy day in September in the UK, which can often be quite chilly. And so as she walks along the path, she closes her eyes and continues to play the game that she's played since she was a child of using her senses to guide her way. And when she opens her eyes, she's very startled because there's a dark figure in front of her, and she puts up her hands and gets ready to fight until she realizes that it's Matthew, and he's quite concerned about her. He's wondering what she's doing out here, and he's a little bit stern with her, and she explains that she just went for a row and that she loves this weather and she likes playing this game. And he draws attention to the fact that she's being followed, and does she really think that it was safe for her to be doing this when she so easily could have been taken on the water and no one would have seen it happen because of the fog. And so she agrees with him. He sees that she's chilly and he offers her a ride back home, and she makes a funny remark of 4 days ago she would have never thought about taking a ride from a vampire, but right now, because she's so cold, she thinks it's a wonderful idea. And so they go around and she starts walking towards the parking lot of a nearby college, and Matthew chuckles and says not that way, and they go to where his Jaguar is parked under a do not park sign, and she kind of gives him a look like, really, I guess you don't care about rules. And he says usually he's a law-abiding citizen, but he figured because of the weather no one would mind if he parked there for the day. So they get in and he asks her if she's hungry for breakfast, and she says yes, and he takes them to this little cafe that she's never been to before. They go in and Matthew knows the owner. Her name is Mary, and she asks how he's doing. Matthew asks how her husband's doing, and they're very friendly, and she asks what they would like, and they order tea and some breakfast and they sit down. Diana asks how he knows them, and so he talks about how Mary suspects that there's something different about him, but she never questions it too much, and that it's really just a matter of her and her family are very grateful for Matthew because they believe that he's the reason why her husband is still alive to this day. And so he's not really willing to talk about this anymore, so the conversation moves on from there to talking about safety, because Diana noticed that Matthew has been being very protective over her since they walked into the cafe. He was displaying a lot of the traits that she had read about from the Norwegian wolves, and so she kind of teasingly but also probing a little bit says to Matthew, "Who are you protecting me from? I can tell that you're in a security mode right now. And so Matthew says that this man by the door, when they had walked in, had said that Diana looks tasty, and she chuckles at Matthew and tells him that that's a slang term for someone is attractive. And so they kind of have a little bit of back and forth. Mary's daughter Steph brings over their tea and food, and Diana goes into this whole ritual of how she does her tea, of just putting the right amount of milk in, steeping it to the perfect amount of strongness for her, and she adds just the right amount of milk. And Matthew's watching her the whole time, and he remarks that he's never seen someone care so much about tea, and Diana says something about how then he must not have been around many tea lovers before. And so this kind of playful banter goes back and forth for a little bit at this breakfast, and then they get into a little bit more of the meat and potatoes. So I forgot to mention before that Diana, as she was getting into Matthew's Jaguar, said to herself that she wanted to go, one, because it was cold, but also she wanted to probe a little bit more to find out what Matthew knows about Ashmole 782. So the opening comes up while they're at breakfast, where she starts to ask him about why he studies science, and he kind of deflects immediately and says, well, why do you study history? And so she says, I asked you first. And so he answers her question that he's really been studying all of this science because he wants to learn more about why vampires are the way they are, what their purpose is in life. And so Diana kind of asks a follow-up question of, well, aren't scientists more concerned about the where and the what and not so much about the why? And Matthew gets really frustrated because he's like, that's modern science. When I started studying science, it was much more about the why, and that's really what I study now. And then he flips it on her, and he asks her why she's studying history. And so she gives this whole story about how she really likes history because it's very straightforward, and there's a beginning, middle, and end of all the historical stories. But then as she continued through history, she liked finding the areas where they didn't have the ending, and they weren't sure why someone did something. And so she really likes to take that further. And they ended up talking together about alchemy and how alchemists are really also trying to figure out the why around what everything is. And so Matthew asks her a follow-up too of why she writes as if magic doesn't exist. And Diana says that one of the things that she finds interesting about humans is that they've really decided that magic does not exist in their world. And so she's enjoyed learning about how that's come about, considering the magical world is right in front of their eyes, and yet they believe so strongly that there are no real magical creatures, there is no magic in the world. And so this conversation kind of evolves, and they talk about this for a while until finally it's getting late, and Matthew says, I think I should probably bring you back so that you can get going with your research for today. And Diana says she actually feels like she needs a shower and to go to yoga because she's been sitting just way too much. And so Matthew kind of brightens up at this, and he asks her, well, do you practice? And she says, yes, but I just go to this yoga studio on the high street. I haven't found someone yet that I really like. And Matthew is thrilled, and he says, well, I have a yoga class that you could go to, and I think you would really like it, but you'll have to wait until tomorrow evening. And so Diana immediately tries to say, oh, well, what's the name of it? I'll call, maybe they have a class tonight. And Matthew says, no, they only meet a few times a week, and tomorrow is the next class, but I'm happy to pick you up. And so Diana agrees to this. Matthew drives her back to her dorm, and she meets Fred, the porter, there, and he immediately compliments Matthew on the Jaguar. And Diana goes upstairs to her apartment, and when she gets up there, she takes out a $10 bill from her wallet, sticks it in an envelope, and addresses it to Chris. And she's in her head just saying, I can't believe that Chris won this bet, and Matthew actually did ask me out within the first week. And so that is where chapter 7 leaves us. And now I'll go into my questions. So the settings for this chapter, it's a foggy morning. We start in Diana's apartment, then we're on the foggy streets of Oxford all the way down to the river. We're on the river in the boat, and then we're walking back into town, and again it's really foggy until we bump into Matthew. Then it's in Matthew's luxurious car, his Jaguar, and Diana, which I forgot to mention, also has a little remark about how if Sarah could see that vampires drive luxurious cars like this, she's sure that she would go on a rant even more about how entitled vampires are and all of these things. And so that's the next part. And then it's this cute little cafe that Matthew knows about that Diana doesn't, and it's really just for locals of Oxford to go to. And then of course we go back to the Jaguar and then to Diana's apartment again. The characters for this, it's Diana, there's two random people on the river, there's Fred the porter, we see him twice in this chapter. It's as Diana's leaving in the morning and then when she comes back with Matthew at the end. There's Mary and Steph at the little cafe. So that's it for our characters for this chapter. So the Easter eggs for this chapter, both magical and historical, is really the debate about philosophy versus science. So that has been going on for a really long time, and it reflects the real renaissance of enlightenment and alchemy and proto-science bridging why and how. So the magic watch in this, I think it's very clear that Diana is using maybe a little bit of magic when she's doing her games of using her senses, because most people, even if you have really good senses, would not be able to walk with your eyes closed in the fog on a slippery pavement and not just wipe out completely. So I think that there's a little bit of hinting at that she's using a little bit of magic there, and I think there's a hint that I think they're hinting also at the fact that she uses her magic when she's preparing her tea as well, because it's always to perfection. She talks about how she has mastered how to always have a perfect cup of tea, and I love tea, but there are definitely times where I make it wrong, so I think that there's a little bit of magic at play there too. So the mood of this and tone of this is it starts off a little eerie and spooky with her having a nightmare, and then it goes into her kind of on the water and this rhythmic meditative state that she goes into when she's rowing, to kind of a fun little bantery breakfast date between her and Matthew. So I really love the progression from spooky to this fun, more lighthearted and inquisitive philosophy-based debate that they have at breakfast. For symbols, there's fog, which I think is always a really interesting symbol to use in writing because it's physical fog, yes, but then there's the metaphorical fog of Diana not being sure what's going on and trying to find her way through the fog, and she's, in my opinion, we don't know this of course yet, but it seems like she's starting to rely more on her inner magic and her inner self to guide her way through the fog, and she does that through these little games of closing her eyes. So I thought the fog was a really interesting and fun touch for this chapter. So for romance, we have, of course, a lot of tension at the beginning. We have Matthew being a gentleman, which I also didn't touch on this much in the summary, but Matthew opens the door for Diana twice, actually 3 times. He opens it to have her go into the Jaguar, then he opens the Jaguar door again for her, and then he opens the door to the cafe, and Diana, you know, is trying to assert that she is independent, she doesn't need someone to open the door, and Matthew is kind of like, why does it matter? I'm not saying you're not independent, I'm just being a gentleman, this is what I do. And so Diana finally chalks it up to, I'm not going to fight him on this, it's not worth it, this is something he wants to do, as long as he buys me breakfast, we're good. So I thought that was really cute. There's banter, there's lots of banter between them where they're kind of pushing each other's buttons. There's moments where Diana kind of really pisses Matthew off, and then he has to get his temper under control, and he does the same to her with asking a lot of follow-up questions and playing devil's advocate and things during the breakfast. So I thought that was really cute to kind of see their dynamic unfolding. And then of course the $10 bet seals it, because that means that Diana acknowledges that Matthew has asked her out, and so she sends that off to Chris, and that was just really fun to see that bet come back around and that it was a real bet and she is admitting that she lost it. Food and drinks, I think this is self-explanatory. There's tea, there's this rich food description while they're at breakfast where Diana talks about how delicious all of the food is. She gets eggs, toast, vegetables, all sorts of things for breakfast. So there's just really rich food descriptions, and of course her tea is a big one. So that's really cool to see more of Deborah Harkness's rich food description coming into play in this chapter. So the overall vibe of this chapter, I think it's a turning point because it's Diana realizing that she has some feelings and interest in Matthew. She's still not fully there yet. She still has hesitations, but she acknowledges that 4 days ago she would not have been comfortable getting into a car with him, and now she was looking forward to it. She's having fun at breakfast. She feels protected by him. So it's a big shift. And I think for Matthew too, he's realizing that he has a little bit more interest in her beyond just her ability to summon an ancient book that he's been looking for hundreds of years. So I think that this is a really cool turning point in the story. So the foreshadowing, we have Matthew's wolf-like protectiveness. I think that's going to definitely come into play more and more because it's been mentioned a few times now, and I don't think that she would do that unless it's going to become a more prevalent issue or maybe something good in this dynamic between the two of them. So I think that the yoga invitation too is also really sweet because it shows that Matthew is diverse and he likes to invite Diana to things that he knows she's interested in, and he's showing that he's willing to have a more intimate one-on-one or small group experience with her outside of just being in a very public cafe or in a public library. That it foreshadows that there will be more of these little invitations and one-on-ones, and both of them are starting to want that more too. They're wanting to spend more time with each other. So overall, I think that this chapter was really fun. I enjoyed this breakfast date that they had. I think that we learned so much more about both of them. And so my question that I'm going to leave everyone with today for our discussion is, would you have gotten into Matthew's Jaguar and gone to breakfast, or would you have said nope to a vampire date no matter how good the tea may be? And so I think that that is just a very broad question, but also there's a lot of deeper aspects to that. So would you go against your better judgment, perhaps, or something that has been deeply instilled in you, because we know that there's prejudice that Diana grew up with from her aunts against a vampire? So would you go against all of that to find out more about everything you want to, or to kind of nourish this want that you're feeling in yourself to go and hang out with this new character? Or would you turn away from it and go along with what you have been taught, good or bad, in your life, and stay with the more safe option? So I'll leave you all with that, and I will see you tomorrow for chapter 8. Bye!
So many readers, close your eyes. Let the stories lift and rise. Till next time, when the lights will gleam.